Welcome to another episode of collaboration between Pekingnology and Baiguan. Today, besides me and Zichen, we also invite another old friend, Johnny Zhou. So Johnny Zhou is a Hong Kong-based venture capitalist educated from Yale University. I invited Johnny to speak at Baiguan Radio before. You must be quite familiar with him. Welcome, Johnny. Say hello to our audience.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Robert. Hi, Zichen. Delighted to be here.
Great. So obviously today's topic will be DeepSeek, the talk of the town. So Zichen, why don't you start with what do you want to say about this?
Well, among the three of us, I'm the only one now currently based in the United States. I'm in New Jersey right now, and everyone is witnessing the bloodbath in the New York Stock Exchange, and Nvidia and a bunch of other stocks lost a lot of money. And I think on Twitter, which is called X now, and throughout all the media outlets, DeepSeek has been dominating the headlines throughout the day. And I just read that President Donald Trump actually gave a public response to the news today. And he was actually quite positive. He said, this is a wake-up call for America to, double down on competing with China. But he saw this like DeepSeek advancement in AI as a positive thing. I think he repeated at least twice in his speech, because he says now everyone doesn't have to spend so much money on developing AI. And so I was a little bit surprised, and maybe pleasantly surprised, because I think for the entire day, the discussion has been dominated by the, geopolitical rivalry between China and the US, what kind of implications DeepSeek would have for the United States. And I think this is a big part of the story, but that's not the whole story. DeepSeek's models are open sourced, so everyone in the world can, make use of that. There is an ongoing effort on Hugging Face to basically remake the model. And it is a very good thing for the humanity. And the world is bigger than just the United States and China. And I think there will be a lot of good coming out of it. And I think.
What do you think of the idea that some people have kind of accused DeepSeek team and also China by extension, to basically launching a kind of Pearl Harbor type of attack on the U.S. capital market? What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think I came across that tweet as well. Someone was saying like, this is the biggest attack China launched since Pearl Harbor. And someone jokingly replied that, no, Pearl Harbor was by the Koreans, not the Chinese. And well, I think, I published a newsletter earlier today. You can read it on Pekingnology. Basically, DeepSeek is a spin-off, a in-house part of a totally private run quant trading firm, which is called High Flyer, 换方量化 in Chinese. This is definitely not a Chinese state-owned company. And this is a private effort by, quant traders who during their development amassed, remarkable talent from people with elite education in the Chinese mainland, in mathematics, in programming. And this is a commercial endeavor. This is not a, Chinese government mandated, deployed, troops to do this thing. And it will be seen in the China-US relations length. And there are also some others saying, the timing must be deliberate. This is intended to torpedo the just announced Stargate initiative in the US. And my response is, well, if you say the timing is purposefully, ahead of the Spring Festival so that the team can go have a good rest, I'll have more confidence in that version of the explanation of the timing. I often told the Chinese that not everything happening in the United States is targeted on China, like the interest rate decision in the Fed. It doesn't. They make that decision not with Beijing in mind. I think in this thing, obviously, I I'm not inside DeepSeek, but I wouldn't really imagine that, this team in Hangzhou, Eastern China was, deliberately planning some very timely effort to strike at the heart of America. I think that is just ridiculous. At least it doesn't have any factual basis. And I think there is another widely circulating assertion coming from just one tweet from some CEO of an AI company, which says, the DeepSeek might have some chips from NVIDIA, which could be against the US export controls. But the guy didn't provide any factual basis for the assertion. But somehow that assertion has spread like wildfire, and even in very serious mainstream media, people were talking about the possibility as if, maybe it's 40% correct or 50% true. But we don't really have any idea of that. And this is a company that has been very, very open, making everything open. And I don't see any factual basis to doubt that they are deliberately lying to people. And they also made it clear that, the very small budget, which I think is like a bit over $5 million US dollars. If you really read that paper, they said this is for this particular training. It didn't include, the cost of the personnel, basically, the compensations for all the researchers on the team. So yes, the total cost for developing this, R1 model will be larger than 5.5 million, but I don't think they deliberately underreported their cost. Okay, I might have said too much. Johnny, do you have some observations to chip in?
Yeah, I kind of fully echo your view to a certain extent. Like for someone like me who's kind of very deeply involved in the AI investment space, DeepSeek is not a name that has come out of the blue. Actually, if you look at even the competition list about a year ago, DeepSeek is well on the list, and they're well on the top of the list. The only reason why people felt it's a bit of a surprise is that DeepSeek as an organization is not as well known or as quote unquote, from a Western point of view, transparent as some of the other startups in China. For instance, someone like Minimax or Kimi or a few others, right? So I think that's probably contributes to one of the reasons why it is certainly a bit of a surprise for people to see, oh, why such a company becomes so, successful. But to a certain extent, I'm not at all surprised by the fact that they came out with a model that is, at least as equivalent of the functionality or productivity of the OpenAI model. But the cost part is obviously what led to the whole sort of discussion today, is that whether we still need so many advanced NVIDIA chips. And I think to a certain extent, the US reaction towards all this is kind of very contradictory, because to the one end, they're saying, oh, DeepSeek come up with a model at such a low cost, so the capex investment in the past could be wasted. But on the other hand, they're trying to say, oh, we need to invest more. It's not enough. And that's why we need to ban all the chips exporting to China. And we just need to be well ahead of everyone by, capex investment, by export control, and all that. So it's very contradictory to a certain extent. But I do think it's a very interesting time, given that they did launch a very powerful model. It's open sourced, and all the researchers can use it, like it or not. The entire DeepSeek team also published a very thorough academic paper going through the entire sort of mechanism behind it. Obviously, it's not like giving you all the code, but at least it gives you all the methodology behind how they came up with this whole thing. So to me, it's a very interesting phenomenon, in that also I think a lot of people quoted Jim Fan's sort of view that, oh, actually China's version of OpenAI is more open, right? So I think that's also a very interesting phenomenon to me. Just to summarize, however, what's going to be the reaction from the US side, I think a lot of the reaction and the overreaction is for so-called domestic consumption. These people, they just want more money from the government. Stargate is being one of the example, but Donald Trump is also supportive of this because it also opens up to a discussion that the Federal Reserve should cut rates more aggressively, right? Which plays to his own advantage. So a lot of the things we're only thinking about DeepSeek, but it's actually not related to DeepSeek. It's actually very related to what's going on in Washington right now and what's the policy directive trying to, further boost up the economy or boost up the stock market.
Do you think the development actually caught Beijing by surprise as well?
Well, you need to define what is called surprise. I think the surprise part is probably the reaction from the Western sort of scientific community in that they find the model to be very productive. They find the open source of the model to be very generally beneficial to the whole community. They are also probably a little bit surprised by DeepSeek as an app became the number one app, which surpassed OpenAI on the US App Store. I think that is something they're very surprised about. But I think given that the premier of China also met with the founder of DeepSeek just a while ago, I'm sure there's a lot of discussion already. Beforehand, they know a little bit about this company, why it's becoming so successful and all that. So I don't think the breakthrough is much of a surprise, but rather the reaction. And obviously yesterday's stock performance is definitely a surprise to Beijing.
Yeah, just to add some background, Johnny was mentioning was that, basically the Chinese premier Li Qiang, who is like the number 2 official in China, hosted a symposium with a number of representatives, with, researchers as well as entrepreneurs. And Liang Wenfeng, the founder of DeepSeek, as well as its parent company, the High Flyer quantitative trading company, he was invited to be at the table and among like a group of the participants who was who was giving some advice to the Chinese premier.
I think that was in response to the previous model, right? The V3 model, which already was quite shocking for many people. And I think up until that model's publication, it's very likely that DeepSeek has gone under the radar by the Chinese authorities, at least the top level authorities. It's possible that maybe the Hangzhou or Zhejiang province authorities, they may be involved in some way. It's possible, but I don't think until they make to, the V3 model, the Beijing took notice. And one big reasoning I had was, after all, it's a quant fund. Quant fund, until DeepSeek, had a really bad name in China.
Yes. And you use the word involved. Maybe I think you mean was aware of the
yes. Aware that at least some people maybe in Zhejiang they were aware there was this company, they're doing some interesting stuff. There are some bunch of really talented people and they're connected to this quant fund. Maybe I think that's possible. That's very possible. But again, at that time before V3, if they try to persuade Beijing that we are going to make this, I cannot imagine a Beijing official accepting the chance that a quant fund being able to do this, because quants has so much historical baggage associated with it, right? And
you two are in the stock market, so I'm sure many of our audience are not familiar with, why quants get such a bad name in China. Maybe fill in some background.
Yeah, so quants employ systematic quantitative strategies by betting on all stocks and finding the mismatch in pricing using data, using algorithms. So they are not emotional. They are not emotional traders. They don't use their human proprietary judgment to trade, but use algorithm. So what the problem is, during the market crash, quant fund may magnify that crash. Well, they're actually doing very high frequency trades, kind of connecting buyer and sellers, right? But because they trade at a very high volume, it's very easy to be picked on to say, oh, you are selling, and you are selling in large volumes. In the beginning of last year, all of the Chinese quant funds, they are basically betting on one strategy, which is the widening gap, valuation gap between small companies and big companies, right? And you remember at that time, there was a state-run push to boost the index. And what that means is that a lot of those national team, 国家队 funds, they are crowding into the mega caps, the bigger companies that make up the index, right? So all this strategy just kind of, become very dangerous for the quant funds that use that strategy. So there was a big crash in the quant market. A lot of people were very concerned about putting their investments into quant. So it has a very bad name. And every time there was a market crash, there will be blame on quant funds.
People just blame quant funds. I think part of the bigger background is also that China's stock market has been doing very bad for years and people are unhappy. Secondly, there is a lot of retail investors in China, mom and pop funds, grandmas and grandpas. And when they suffer losses, they'll point finger to, big, quant funds, which basically nobody understands how actually it works.
Yeah, exactly.
Except you guys. And the Chinese government are actually very responsive to this sort of mass displeasure. So the China Securities Regulatory Commission, which is, China's stock regulator, issued rules after rules, basically cracking down, limiting the sort of, transactions, huge volume, high frequency transactions of quant funds, including the parent of DeepSeek. So they weren't exactly on the favor side of the Chinese government in the past several years.
Not at all. And the people in the industry were joking that DeepSeek single-handedly saved the quant industry in China too, because now they really contributed to the hard tech. So they proved that high finance is actually pretty valuable if you somehow shift your talents a little bit towards another, endeavor. Yeah. So I think it's just like one biggest reason that this is not state-run. It's pretty independent.
I think part of the reason that they have won some domestic applause is that the team, according to publicly available information, graduates of very elite universities in China, but actually very few of the team members have overseas experience, and so they're like a homegrown team instead of people who are from UC Berkeley or Princeton or Harvard, and just before the latest models, they were pretty invisible actually to people who have not been paying attention. Although, to be fair, I think, for example, Bloomberg Intelligence or, some good industry publications, as Johnny has said, did highlight, DeepSeek has always been one of the top players in the Chinese AI startup league. But that it has rocketed to the international fame and implications, the speed is indeed breathtaking. I'm pretty sure, I'm just guessing, but I'm pretty sure it's out of their expectations as well. They were most likely prepared to celebrate the Spring Festival, and now they dominate international headlines, and Donald Trump is talking about them. And, one thing is, perhaps because I used to work for media, is that for the past month, they have kept radio silent. They if it's an American firm, your CEO would be on Bloomberg, CNBC, and everywhere, and going on podcasts. But they have indeed kept a very, very low profile. And, I think part of the invisibility maybe does contribute to the confusion, in America.
Yeah. Johnny, I have a question for you. Because you invest in AI companies, what do you think the DeepSeek will affect your strategy? And also, what do you think about all these other large language model startups, companies like, Kimi or Minimax? How will they be affected in this?
Well, that's a super challenging question because, in the AI space, they said you change your strategy on a weekly basis, but now it seems like weekly is not enough. You probably need to do it on a daily basis. But I do have when OpenAI launched its ChatGPT model back in the days, I did have a prediction that the large language model could be very commoditized in the future. And it proves to be the case, being the fact that, there's just a lot of people working on this space and they're super talented and everybody is trying to be very competitive using the state-of-the-art, either hardware or software architecture to make it to be as powerful as possible. And even moving DeepSeek out of the picture, just think about the pressure OpenAI had in 2024 alone. The pressure actually is not from DeepSeek. It's actually from a lot of its other competitors, like Anthropic, like Google Gemini, like also Facebook's Llama. People said it's lame, but actually a lot of people still using it, right? So even in the US, there's a lot of competition. So in China, people said there's called the AI 6 tigers or 6小虎, right? I'm not sure if they are all tigers.
2 months ago, I thought it was 4 tigers or 5 tigers. I don't know. So many tigers recently.
Well, a lot of them are paper tigers, but anyway, it doesn't matter. But it just shows how competitive this field is. So, I mean, DeepSeek just, completely make the picture even more competitive to a certain extent. So if I were a wise investor, I would not be so tempted to try to invest in those large language models right now. It's just like, I'm not sure if the analogy is the right one, but I think it's more like the early days of electricity, where someone like Tesla or like Edison, they just fought with each other on what is the best mode of electricity. But if you think about the history afterwards, is that people then make electrical appliances, is that people then makes a lot of the goods from these electricity that makes our life a lot better. That really profited it from a business point of view. So today we are talking about, how electricity is made or whether you use which adapter is the best model for electricity. It could be the wrong question in the long run from an investor point of view. But it's certainly very important from a country's perspective. So that's why people are elevating this whole thing to a national security type of situation, saying that, now China has an edge, or at least, it seems like they have an edge over something, and what are we going to do? That's the US side of reaction, and makes it, the whole farce on the capital markets as well. But if you think from an investment point of view, I don't think it's the right question to say, whether, you should invest in electricity companies right now. I just feel that it's so far away from real business sense, right? There will just be more competition. The current price, as we know of, will continue to drop. There will be more state-of-the-art chips from the US side, likely not going to come to China, but China will come up with their own chips, or China will come up with their own way of algorithm to make it even more competitive. So if you think about from this point of view, the large language model is very deflationary, and deflationary sort of product is always not very good for business, but is very good if you build a whole ecosystem based on this technology. So I think if you really look into it, it's also slightly contradictory if you look at it from a pretty comprehensive point of view.
Just mentioned that, export the chips, maybe other more advanced chips from NVIDIA will not come to China. But I think one of the debates that has been ignited because of DeepSeek is there are voices. For example, I think a pretty good female professor wrote in the Financial Times that, the success of DeepSeek demonstrates that, the US export controls doesn't actually work. It advises the Chinese to focus on increasing efficiency. But also, of course, there are, a different voice, which is that no, the singular success of DeepSeek doesn't mean that, export control is not working. Like the effect of the export control has not kicked in, and it's over time, given the scale, the U.S. companies, AI companies, much bigger scale, will have a very big lead in terms of hardware of infrastructure advantage over the Chinese AI companies. So the U.S. should stick with export control regime, and if not, double down on that. And I think I'm reading that discussion or debate. And so, we are like Chinese. So maybe when we talk about this, some of the people will say, of course, you guys will advocate for a, loosening of the export control. So I just want to ask Johnny again, what's your expectations? You think like the BIS of the Commerce Department will not, change its strategy because of this, right?
I think there are two layers to your question. One is obviously with the NVIDIA launching better chips, whether it's going to improve the current large language model. The answer is quite unknown. The reason for that is, I think in 2024, there's a very famous speech made by the former top scientist of OpenAI, Ilya Sutskever. And I think he made
the limit of scaling, right? Basically.
Exactly. So what he's saying is that for pre-training, which means that you put all the source text from all over the internet and you try to using brute force to learn the pattern of it and trying to make sense of it, this phase has already passed. So we're now into the phase of post-training. And whether post-training requires so many sort of state-of-the-art chips is to be debated, or at least people don't know whether this is the right way to do. My sense is that there will be a lot of different sort of companies working on different verticals, as well as there will be companies trying to replicate the success of OpenAI in trying to use a lot of data in post-training as well, trying to make sense of it. The reality is no one knows. No one has the crystal ball which pattern is going to work. But for NVIDIA, certainly they just want to sell the chips as much as they could, right? But maybe from DeepSeek's point of view, they find out a way that it's actually not necessary. But I'm actually more inclined to believe that in a lot of industry, a lot of the data is still not digitized yet. As a result of that, there's just a lot of work to be done for a lot of vertical industry to digitize first. Because unless you're digitized, you will not have any specific data to work on, right? And with these digitization of specific industries, I believe there will be more data coming out, and there will be certain benefits for people to use the state-of-the-art chips. So I'm kind of more towards the middle in believing that, okay, maybe the old way of trying to say, okay, I have the best chips from NVIDIA will guarantee success. I think that phase has passed. But that doesn't necessarily mean without the chips, you will be successful, right? I think there's still a lot of work to be done. there's still a lot of the data to be coming out of different industries. And you certainly need chips. And if you have good chips, that certainly helps you a lot. But again, China is also trying to produce their own chips. And there's also a lot of Chinese companies working on like the state-of-the-art sort of ASIC or GPUs. So maybe 1 or 2 years from now, you will see another called Sputnik moment of GPU in China, which is totally possible, right? So I'm thinking that the US is being just way too, media oriented or too sensitive on this issue. Because at the end of the day, sure, you will have very good models in the world, but you still need to make money, right? You still need to be a good business. And DeepSeek, I'm not sure about its business model. It's totally open source. Like, okay, but you're not like Google Android, right? Google has a like cash cow, which is its search sort of advertising business. But what is going to be the cash cow for DeepSeek? Well, one may argue that,
of course.
Exactly.
The HS stocks.
Earning pennies from each individual retail investors every day. We are the taxpayers here.
So to a certain extent, we're all contributing
for this kind of thing, huh?
We're all contributing to the success of the Chinese big model. So we should all feel proud about this.
I think, at least I feel obligated to address just one more thing, is basically the censorship. If you ask the public-facing DeepSeek interface, it just will not answer some questions for you. And, for people, there are quite some people posting all these snapshots of the non-answers online. And I think that's just a fact because, DeepSeek as a Chinese company has to basically comply with the Chinese laws and regulations. But because it's open sourced, so if you download their model and you deploy it to your own servers and, do all the necessary preparations, you can basically bypass that. Is my understanding correct, Robert?
Yes, I think so. It's a difference between the cloud-hosted version, their app version, their web version, which they are hosting in China. They have to comply with Chinese laws, right? But then I think the main beauty of that is they have this open source model, so everyone can tweak and install safely at their local environment, which is also related to the data problem, right? If you don't want to give your data to this company, if you don't want to give your data to China,
fall into the hands of CCP.
At the same time, you don't want to give your data to Sam Altman, right? You can always find your best open source model and just keep your data at your own site. I think it's just a little bit pathetic that by now, I think the only criticism that people might kind of throw at DeepSeek team is this part. Whether they can answer the questions about Xi Jinping or whatever sensitive topics that are in China. But to be honest, I think I saw one really interesting comment from a American researcher, is that, he just basically said, to be frank, when an Indonesian choose a model, this kind of question will be the least problem they will care about. Right. So
be careful there, huh? Be careful there.
I'm just quoting someone, huh? But that's true. We have to look at it at a global scale. At the end of the day, it's the 7 billion people in the world who will be using these products. And we have to evaluate the merit of it comprehensively, right?
Well, if we are going to end on a high note, I just really want to, basically reiterate the points that I started with. It's beyond just China and the United States. The models are open source, which means if you think, the CCP buried some Trojan house in there, you can basically check it by yourself, right? And you can deploy it by yourself and no data will fall into Beijing or, other Chinese companies. And I think most importantly, it gives the possibility of many, many more countries and different peoples across the world to learn from the latest invention and to upgrade their own systems, to deploy their own models, and to use maybe AIs to automatically to check if the X-ray images that they just take prove some sort of potential health concerns. So if the generative AI is as good as people have been hyping, the more the better, the more the merrier, and it's going to be good for humanity. And I'm just glad Donald Trump said something quite positive. And actually, I think I just checked the head of OpenAI, Sam Altman, also said something quite positive. Yes, but for investors who have lost money, I'm sorry, this Monday isn't very good for you.
Great. So maybe let's call it a day. Thank you so much for joining this emergency meeting pre-Lunar New Year. Cool.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Lunar New Year. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Bye-bye.